Welcome back to Retired Life in Mexico, No Bull. Relocating to Mexico, No Bull. Today we have episode number 4 of Relocating to Mexico, No Bull. We're going to discuss the RFC and taxes here in Mexico. So we're going to let you know what you need to know about the RFC and why it's such a big deal here in Mexico. Now, before we start, I want to make clear, just like I always do, is that we're not tax experts. And if you need tax advice, we advise that you contact a tax expert here in Mexico. But what
Mhm.
we're trying to do here is just give you some simple information to commonly asked questions about different subjects here in Mexico. The other thing is some of these episodes take a long time. They run upwards of an hour. So what I do is place chapter markers so you can skip to the questions, straight to the questions that you may have instead of having to watch a whole hour video when you only wanted to know one thing. So I have my co-host here, Mariana from Mexico Relocation Guide. How are you doing, Mariana?
Hello, I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you on the show again, and it's great that this show has become a success. And I really look forward to doing more episodes with you. Uh, let's start off, Mariana, because I started talking about taxes and RFC, because really the actual subject today is going to be the RFC, but it's also related to revenue collection here in Mexico. So, explain to us exactly what an RFC is. It's also known as RFC. If you hear someone say RFC, RFC is the abbreviation. Uh, RFC is the Spanish pronunciation of the word, of the letters. So, what is an RFC? If you hear someone talk about it, what exactly is it?
Yeah, it's basically a unique number that is given to you. It stands for Registro Federal de Contribuyentes, and it's basically a federal registration number that a contributing person, a tax contributing person, registers within the SAT. And the SAT is basically the equivalent of the IRS if you're from the US and are familiar with the IRS, or your Treasury Department if you're from another country. So the RFC is given to only residents and nationals in Mexico, and it's a way for you to tell the SAT or the SAT basically to tell you or any other company or financial institution that you are registered and can do fiscal transactions.
And another thing to note is SAT also your customs Mexican they're revenue collectors here in Mexico, so they also handle customs issues as far as paying import taxes and that type of thing. They're the ones that you see at the airport or at the port of entry that will sometimes tell you you need to pay taxes on your extra laptop or import taxes on your extra laptop. So SAT is sort of like the IRS. They're, like you said, the whole Treasury Department for Mexico. Um, now, this RFSA, what I always say is kind of equivalent to your social security number. Now, in Mexico, you have
Mhm.
two numbers. You have your CURP, which is your national ID number, which is for residents and also for Mexican citizens. Mexican citizens also have another number called the INE, which is their voter registration number, which is also an identification number. And then this RFSA is for the specific purpose of doing physical transactions. And it also is for the purpose of paying your taxes. Um,
Mhm.
Kind of a simple thing. Uh,
Simplification of it, yeah. It's
Simplification
it's a
to
little
pay your
bit
taxes.
deeper than that, but yeah.
It's a little bit cheaper because we talk about physical transactions. We're going to get into that. What is a physical transaction and how does it work here? Um, Now, one of the things that people are asking for, like insurance company, now I do know that this number now is going to be required for example, connecting your utilities. They're already asking people that connected their utilities prior um, to provide their RFSA. One of the things that's very important about this RFSA, that I'll go into a little bit of detail here, is that the RFSA, there was a law that was passed, and it went into effect in 2022, that basically said that every person over the age of 18 must get an RFSA. Now, here's the big problem, and it's kind of confusing. When they say everybody over the age of 18, does that mean Mexican citizens? Does that mean residents? Does that mean temporary residents? Does it mean permanent residents? Does that mean people that are working? So we're going to try to answer some of those questions. And you're going to find that, why would I need one if I don't pay taxes or I don't have a job, I'm retired? So we're going to answer those questions. But one of the things that a lot of people are asking for is your Constancia de Situacion Fiscal. Can you explain what that is? Because, for example, my wife got asked for her Constancia with our insurance policy here in Mexico. They're starting to add a lot of, for example, your insurance, your car insurance is asking for your Constancia. Constancia for short. What is it,
Yeah.
Constancia de Situación Fiscal?
Yeah. So before, right, before 2022, when this law hadn't been placed into effect, where they were asking everybody to get an RFC over the age of 18, essentially, the way that many companies worked before is that in order for you to do certain transactions that require them to then declare taxes, they would use a generic RFC. So a generic RFC is just basically an alphanumeric number that is randomly generated. But what ended up happening was there was a lot of identity theft, or there was like fraudulent facturas, which are tax receipts. Those are the only official tax receipts that Mexico accepts for a company to be able to declare expenses and taxes and things like that, and for individuals to be able to declare expenses and things against their taxes. Anyway, to make a really long story short, because the laws changed in 2022, it is no longer enough for you to have just your RFC. Now the SAT, or the Treasury Department in Mexico, can give you a certificate authenticating that you are registered in the SAT and can then perform fiscal transactions. So now you can do things that require a company to claim taxes or be able to issue tax receipts for expenses and things like that. So it's a way for SAT or the Treasury Department to tell these companies that you are indeed registered in their system.
And actually, one thing to note about that is that the RFC basically, like we said, it's kind of a tax ID number. So not only, because you mentioned about claiming taxes, but if you're a business, you also need that RFC to issue a receipt or a factura, where we're going to go into what a factura is. So it's on both sides. It's for the business to report that they're actually making income. Like if you pay somebody, they're going to issue your receipt, but that income also is tracked by the Treasury Department, by SAT. It's actually tracked. So actually SAT can see how much a business makes based on their facturas that they issue. And then this generic number, I experienced it. They used the generic number for me a lot because when I was having medical issues, the hospital would have to issue a factura. They were required to, because they're a business that was doing business with me and they have to be able to report that income. But I didn't have a tax ID number, so they were issuing it to a generic number. Now, well, depending on which business you deal with, because right now it's kind of a mess, but depending on what businesses that you deal with, there's been some extensions that have been granted that we're going to go into, but depending on what business you deal with, now you need an RFC to do business with them. And some are still accepting the generic number because there's been an extension done. but that's uh, kind of a summary there. And that's
Yeah.
Constancia. Thank you for explaining exactly what a Constancia is, because a lot of people are getting this. Can we have your Constancia? And it people are clueless as to what's a Constancia. Um,
And by
now,
the way, to get your Constancia, if you have an RFC number, you can only get an RFC number right away if you're a resident or you're a Mexican national. If you're a tourist, you can't get an RFC because you actually need your corp to get an RFC, and you can't
mhm,
get a corp if you're not a resident. Um, so, tourists, don't worry. If you're renting a house or you're traveling to Mexico or you're just spending, 6 months, 180 days, you won't need an RFC. It's only for people who are actually planning on renting or opening a bank account or working in Mexico or owning a home and doing improvements to it and then being able to take tax deductions for those things. So there's a limited amount of situations where you will need this RFC when you become a resident. But the very first thing to keep in mind is if you're watching this and you're only planning on being a tourist, don't worry about the RFC.
exactly. It's really if you're going to want to live in Mexico, because in order to navigate Mexico, you're going to have one. Uh, Even if you don't, it's kind of weird. You're going to have one even though you don't need one. Let me
Yeah,
just put it that way.
yeah,
It's kind of a catch 22 situation.
it
Now,
is.
what one of the things that I want to go into, which brings me to this next question. We've kind of gone into it, but why is it that you need an RFC? And there's new laws. We've already discussed it, but there's some deadlines that you need to meet. We just passed one of them, but it was extended to January. Uh,
Hmm.
why would you need an RFC or an RFSA? Why would you need an RFC? And also, the deadlines explain why they have these deadlines exactly. And if I also have, I know why they have the deadlines and what's going on, but can you go ahead and say, why would I need an RFC? Because what I've gotten a lot of is I don't pay taxes here in Mexico. I'm retired. I don't have any Mexican income. Why do I need to report myself to the IRS, Mexican IRS? So, why is it that you would need an RFC? And also, what are these deadlines that
Yeah.
everybody's talking about and freaking out about?
Yeah. Unfortunately, even if you don't generate an income in Mexico, and maybe unfortunately isn't the right word, but regardless of whether you generate an income in Mexico or not, whether you're a retiree, you don't even have a bank account in Mexico, maybe you're renting, you don't plan on owning, I think it's still a good idea to get your RFC if you become a resident. Because I do think in the future it will be more and more required on even the simplest of things, like for example, somebody sent me a picture of those bicycle uh, things that you can rent, like those eco
Mm-hmm.
BCs that you can rent by the hour. Well, now they need the RFC. And if you don't have a generic one, it can be probably impossible for you to rent that now, which I think is it's a whole other bag of chips. Um, but anyway, to get back to your question, Ernie, I do think that even people who aren't generating an income should still consider getting an RFC. Now, because the virtual queue or the line right now to get an appointment online is very long, you can probably wait until until the madness gets less maddening, right? So I would wait until towards the end of the year for you to process your RFC if you're not planning on opening a bank account, if you're not planning on buying a home, if you're not planning on putting utilities in your name, if you're not planning on making any, even some medical hospitals and facilities are now asking for RFCs. And the reason for that is because these are all businesses. So the electric company is a business, medical facilities are businesses, banking institutions are businesses, and they all have to report their transactions, right, to the bigger of all powers, which is the Treasury Department or SAT. And because SAT is requiring all these companies to do their facturas a new way or their tax receipts a new way in 2022, it trickles down to the customer. the customer now has to basically say that they do have permission from SAT to do these fiscal transactions or tax transactions. So I do think that you will need an RFC when you plan to live in Mexico, regardless of whether you actually don't want to open a bank account or don't plan on buying a house or anything like that. I do recommend you actually opening a bank account in Mexico. I think it'll make your life easier in many ways. You'll be able to do things like Uber in Mexico with your Mexican debit card, buy things on Mercado Libre, which is kind of the Craigslist of Mexico. You'll be able to pay your rent in most cases online, pay your utility bills online. A lot of things are beneficial to you having a bank account. Um, but the reason that people need an RFC is because these companies are because these transactions are happening. They need to let SAT know or the Treasury Department know who these people are. And the only way that the SAT will know whenever you're not a national, you weren't born into the Mexican system, is for you to then have this tax ID number.
And even Amazon is going to require
Amazon.
an RFC if you want to order from Amazon. And this is the thing that I think that people get wrong. Exactly. You actually pointed this out right now. But I think what people get wrong is, like I said, the attitude is, I don't generate income. I don't this. I don't pay taxes. I don't. Wait a second. What happens is that we kind of have this image of the IRS as collecting taxes. SAT is like
Yeah.
the Mexican IRS. Okay, they hold several functions, but one of their functions is the IRS. Okay, you'll have to remember that in the United States, I equivocate. For example, when you make an income, uh, you have a W two, so that's reported to the IRS. Basically, a company says, I paid this employee so much money. It gets reported to the IRS. And when you file your taxes, that gets compared to what you file or that type of thing. What people need to understand about this RFC is that in Mexico, the way things work with businesses, any kind of goods that are sold, for example, you purchase a car, even if you purchase something at Home Depot, those types of
Furniture.
things.
Hmm.
And basically, what the business has to do is which is going to go into my next question, is they have to issue a factura. And the factura is basically, here's the thing, it's not necessarily that you have to report your income, but maybe a business has to report their income. And this is a
Exactly.
system that Mexico has to track income. One of the reasons why these laws were passed is because there was a lot of fraud. There was a lot of facturas that were, like you said, that were fake, um,
Hmm.
for the sake of businesses writing off of their taxes. Basically, a business would say, I bought 10 cars last year, so therefore I get a tax break. And somebody would make a business, a shell company, and
Factura.
then issue a receipt for 10 cars that this company purchased. And now Mexico is getting more into fiscal responsibility, making sure that those facturas are, or someone says, pay me cash. For example, for my, I go to a car lot. They say, give me cash because I'm not going to report it to the
Yeah.
IRS. Okay. Well, now they have to give you a factura. And
Yep.
there's a record of the transaction. And then even if the car dealer tries to say, oh, give me cash, well, the car dealer deposits it in his bank account. So that's a way of SAT being able to track fiscal transactions, like you said, from businesses. So it's not necessarily you that the Mexican government is going after, but it's businesses that are doing business with you. So I think that's
Exactly.
what's very important to understand, because I know a lot of people have told me, why do I even need one? Because, I don't have anything to do with the tax system. And
Yeah.
indirectly, you do, because when you purchase goods, you have something to do with the tax system because there's a business behind the goods that they sold you. So there's going to come a point in time where almost everything's going to be facturado is what they call it. And that goes into my
Hmm.
next question, is a factura. What exactly
Yeah.
is a factura?
So there are two things in Mexico that normally, whenever a point of sale or somebody, I mean, obviously it depends, right? If you go buy tamales or tacos from the street vendor, they're not going to give you a factura. And they probably don't accept credit cards, and it's a cash only system. So you probably know that those people are, for I'm not assuming anything, but they're probably not
Mm-hmm.
claiming all their income to the government. So you can take those people out of the equation here. I'm talking more about transactions like when you go and buy a large piece of furniture, or maybe when you buy a brand new sliding door for your penthouse condo, right? These are all things that if you make huge improvements to your home, you can actually take those as tax deductions when you go and sell the home so that you pay less capital gains. But in Mexico, there's two things: there's a receipt and then there's a factura. Recibo, right, is
Mm-hmm.
just like the note, right, that you get from a restaurant or from the furniture store or from the sliding glass door company. It could serve even as a quote. But a factura is the only actual tax receipt that can be turned in to the Treasury Department that authenticates that this transaction has actually been registered by both parties, whether it's the consumer or the person issuing the factura. So whenever you go to, even if you go to like Palacio del Hierro, which is a really big department store, or even if you go to Liverpool, which is a really big home goods store, they'll ask you, requiere factura, or do you need a factura?
Mm-hmm.
And that's because there's a lot of people in Mexico who are self employed, or maybe they're employed by a company, that all these things can be taken as deductions, right? Or can be reimbursed to them. But the only way for them to actually get those reimbursements, and for the company, if they were to get audited, to prove that those were reimbursements for legitimate things that that employee needed, is through a factura. So just keep that in mind when somebody asks you, do you need a receipt or do you need a factura? What the differences are between those two things.
And one thing to note about the factura system is that usually on big purchases, they'll fill one out, and this is going to go into why do I need an RFC. Uh, but like I said, you go to Liverpool and you buy a TV, they'll ask you if you want a factura because you might own a business that's going to write that off. But you can say no, I don't want a factura, and they have different ways of reporting that to the IRS. But
Mm-hmm.
uh, eventually, what may be coming down the road is that everything gets a factura. So that's one of the main reasons why you may want to get an RFC.
Yeah.
And here's the other thing that I want to get into is there are instances, and we talked about we opening up a bank account. That's one of the instances, but there are instances where an RFC has actually been generated for a person and they don't even know it,
Yeah.
and then they go and they find out later on when they try to get one that they already have one. Now, I also have heard that individuals that are applying for residency now, immigration is actually giving them the actual, do you want an RFC? And some people are not understanding how important it is, and some people are just going, no, I don't need it. Or if I don't need it, it's for taxes. See, that's the big misconception. Everybody thinks it's for taxes. It's for me to pay taxes. I'm not going to pay taxes, so I don't need one. So they don't realize the importance of having one. But one of the things, and I think it's going to become part of the immigration process, that you just automatically, you get a corp automatically. You're probably going to get
Mm-hmm.
an RFC eventually. But one of the things that I think that people don't understand is sometimes when you open up a bank account, an RFC gets generated because the only way the bank can account for you, per se.
Mm-hmm.
Now I opened up a bank account; it didn't get generated for me. I wasn't one of the lucky ones, but I have heard of instances, and also in talking to some accountants, the first thing they'll ask is, "Do you have an RFC? Let me check." Well, but I never signed up for one. Well, let me check anyway. The reason why they say
Yeah.
let me check is because you might already have an RFC. Now, I'm going to place a link in the description of this video to a real good video that Kuru Paul does about how do you find out if you have an RFC. But I'm going to ask the question anyway, even though I'm going to place the link, is how do you find out if you already have an RFC, and what are the types of situations that you might have an RFC and you don't even know it?
The best way for you to find out any information about your RFC is to go to the SAT website, which I don't know it by heart. Sorry, I think it's sat.gov.mx. I might be wrong on that. But there's a section on there where it says trámites, and then you can see obtén tu RFC, or you can go see, I think there's a section on there where you check to see if you have your RFC. And they're going to ask for your corp. They're going to ask for your name, and then they're going to ask for your identification number, which is usually your residence number, not your passport number. By the way, your residency number is usually at the back of your residency card. So there's a number up front, but there's also a number in the back. It's usually the number in the back, or it should always be the number in the back, I should say. But that's how you check to see if you have an RFC. It's
Yeah.
usually through your corp and then your name.
And like I said, there's certain, and I actually didn't know this until someone actually wrote, I think even in my comments of the RFC video that I did, they said, "Oh yeah, I have an RFC because I got it when I opened my bank account." I wish I would have known. Maybe I could have asked the bank, "Can you generate one for me?"
Yeah,
Now,
that's new
even
to me too. I
yeah,
didn't know the bank would
yeah,
issue you one.
and actually, in speaking with an accountant just recently, um, uh, he was asking me because I was saying I'm having problems with getting my RFC and everything else because of the virtual line. And he actually said, "Well, I can check if you have one." And I said, "But I don't, I never asked for one, and I don't think I
Yeah,
have one.
why would I?
Why
Yeah,
would I?" And he actually said there's certain financial transactions that if you conducted in the last couple of years when you were a resident, that
mm,
an RFC gets generated. I don't know if it's just financial institutions or
yeah.
who does that, but
I
and
don't know that
actually,
either. I'm sorry.
I think Kuru Paul actually in his video explains that you might I didn't watch the whole video because I just went to the part on how, the description of what the
How to
website
find
is.
out if you have one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but I think he does a very good job at explaining. I'm going to put a link to his video on that and how you can find out if you already have one before you even start the electronic process. Now, here's the important thing though is if you already have one, you still need to do a couple of things. Not a couple of things, but one thing that's very, very important. SAT has a new system called SAT ID, which basically you can do because basically when you get an RFC, you have to report your address. Let's say you move from San Miguel to Monterrey or Monterrey to San Miguel. I need to change my address. Well, normally in the old days, you had to go to the SAT office and say, I moved, and you have to fill out some forms. But now all of this stuff can be done electronically. And this is one of the reasons why now to obtain this virtual line, you used to be able to get an RFC online. You used to be able to go
hmm
online and just say, I want my RFC. You can't do that anymore. And here's the reason because SAT is taking biometrics. They take your fingerprint and everything else, and they're calling that the firma virtual, your virtual signature. But what that does is that gives you the ability. So, for example, if someone says, I want to print out my RFC, that's protected information here in Mexico. You say, I want to print out my RFC, you can go into SAT ID and you basically confirm who you are. And you can print out your RFC. Or I need to change my address. Um, you go online to SAT ID and you say, I want to change my address. And the reason why they let you do that is because you already provided them with biometrics and all of that stuff. Now, to get an RFC, and actually, it still exists where you can click on a button and say, I want to apply for my RFC online. But then whenever you click on the button, it comes up with a website saying,
You
get
have
in
to
the
make an
virtual
appointment
line.
there. Yeah.
But the reason why you have to get on a virtual line is because, like I said, the RFC, they take your biometrics and also They give you a way of signing on. And from now on, if you need to do anything, or let's say you get a job and you need to change your Constancia, that now an employee of a company, you
Yeah.
can actually get online and report that to SAT. So that's one of the reasons why you need to do that. Um,
Yeah. That's a good
now,
point about the constancia. If you're not generating an income in Mexico and you're not like an employee or an employer, then your constancia says that, right? Like
mhm.
what your situation is fiscally in Mexico. So if you're an employer, then it would have, certain codes in there. If you're an employee, then it would have that's your situation, your fiscal situation. If you're not, then that's your fiscal situation. But it's to give SAT, it's to give people the knowledge that SAT has authenticated that you are in this system.
And now that brings me to the next question: is how do you get an RFC? Because
Yeah.
this is an interesting answer.
Well, the most straightforward way, by the way, to get an RFC, it's 100% free. There are services where people will, offer their services to help you process it, and you're paying them a fee. But to actually get your RFC, it is 100% free. The first thing you need to do is make an appointment with SAT because you need to show up in person, show your documents. You have to show a copy of your passport and an original. You have to bring your residency card, a copy of that, and an original, your CORP. And then you also have to bring a thumb drive because they download a lot of things into that thumb drive. But the very first thing that you need to do is actually make an appointment with SAT to present all these documents in person. Now, because SAT is overwhelmed with the number of Mexican nationals and residents that are all at the same time trying to get their RFCs and their constancias and just figure out, there's a lot of chaos right now in SAT. So because
Mhm.
of the overwhelming majority of people that are all trying to get appointments, naturally they're saturated. So now they have what's called a virtual queue, which basically puts you into a virtual line, and you make an appointment online through SAT. It puts you into a virtual queue, and the numbers are very random. Sometimes you're like number 27,000 in line, and then the next day you're number 5,000, and then the next day you're number 13,000. Nobody really knows why, but just know that they do normally send you an email notifying you of you have 24 hours for the next appointment. So usually you get an email the day before telling you, hey, we have an appointment available for you tomorrow at a specific time. Can you make this appointment? If you can't make that appointment because maybe you're in the US, maybe you actually got into the virtual queue and you're not able to make travel arrangements right away. If you decline it or if you don't answer, it gets put back into the queue and then somebody else gets that appointment. So you do have to be available to make that appointment within 24 hours, by the way.
And I'm gonna
But that
note,
virtual,
and I'm gonna note, there's another good video that's done by Kuro Paul on how to get under that virtual queue. And also, there's another important video that I'm going to leave a link to, also, that he also tells you how to check where in
yeah,
line you are. Here's the important part, and I'm going to give you an example. My wife, she already has an RFC. She had to do what we call a trámite, which means you have to do some type of change to your RFC or change. And she put herself in the virtual line to do that change. Um, we kept checking in the virtual line, and she kept moving up. And the last we saw, she was number 50, and we decided to check Sunday night to see where in line she was, and it says you have an appointment at 2:30 tomorrow. I didn't get, or we didn't get,
any
um, any
notification.
notification. She went ahead and accepted the appointment. We went. She did her tramite, and guess what? I got an email, or we got an email at 2 o'clock in the morning this morning saying that our appointment was yesterday. So
Oh,
the email
you,
came the day after. It was a useless email that came the day after she had already finished her appointment. So it's very important that you keep checking. Now, here's the thing: if you're number 20,000 in the line, you're not going to be by tomorrow number one in the line.
yeah,
Excuse me. But one important thing to note is that you want to keep checking, because not to rely on that email, to keep checking where in line you are. And like I said, I'll place links to those two videos. Um, and I'm not gonna do a video because why reinvent the wheel? And Kuru Paul
Yeah,
does
he's
a
got a
very
good one
he
already.
does a very good
Yeah.
job at explaining how to do it, and it's a very simple process. And he gives you all the links in his description. So I really suggest that you visit those videos if you're interested in getting a RFC. Now, here's another issue that a lot of people have been having. They've been saying, I'm a temporary resident, and when I go to SAT to get my RFC, SAT's telling me, well, you need to be employed, or you need to get an immigration, something from immigration. And so they go to immigration, and immigration is saying, well, in order to give you employment authorization, I need an RFC. So I think
Yeah.
something's going on with the temporary residents that are having issues getting an RFC. Have you heard anything about that issue at all, of temporary residents having issues? Now,
I
I know permanent
personally
residents
have
don't have an issue.
I personally haven't heard of, and it's not because it's not happening.
Mm-hmm.
It's just because I haven't heard of it personally. But it doesn't surprise me because I know in the Mexican government, if you're a temporary resident, you're basically one step above a visitor. Like you're temporarily here. You're not considered a true resident. That's how it's been explained to me by a lot of Mexican consulates and by some of the immigration facilitators that we work with. Why? I don't really know, but I know it's like you're basically considered still a tourist just with permission to live here longer than 6 months. A permanent is truly the one who has, the permission or the rights to live in the country. So it doesn't surprise me that the SAT might actually turn some temporary residents away.
Eh,
They
eh,
shouldn't, though. They
Yeah,
shouldn't. It's
well, and I don't understand why. And actually, Kuru Paul said he on his group, Facebook group or something, that people have been reporting that they're temporary residents and they've been having issues trying to get it, the RFC. Now,
yeah,
one thing that I don't understand is, yes, I understand what you're saying about a temporary residence kind of not being a resident, because even if you want to work, you have to get a special work permission, a work permit. If you're a temporary resident, if you're a permanent resident, you have to report that you're working, but you don't have to get a permit. You're just reporting that you're working. But
right.
so, but as a temporary resident, you can buy a car. As a temporary resident, you can do a lot of things.
You can buy a
So,
house.
buy a
You can
house,
do
open up
everything
a bank account.
basically.
So
Yeah,
why? I don't know if it's just that SAT is putting a priority on
maybe.
Mexican
It
citizens
may
getting theirs first and
It
permanent.
may be only specific SAT offices too, because
Hmm.
as everything in Mexico, every single state has its own offices, and they all get instructions from their own bosses to do things locally to their market. For example, just an example of this that has nothing to do with the RFC is the INAPAM card. An INAPAM card is a retiree discounts card that's given, it's a subsidized by the government for people over the age of 60. And it's for residents or nationals. And it's very clearly defined on the DIF website that it's for people who have an FM2 or FM3. It's kind of outdated, but they mean temporary or permanent residents or nationals. However, there's a lot of offices, DIF offices, which is where you get your INAPAM card, that will not give it to you unless you're a permanent resident. So you just have to go to a different one that doesn't have those requirements. And unfortunately, it does vary by city.
Well, that's very common in Mexico, even with immigration. You go to one immigration office, their process is one way, and you go to another immigration office, their process is a
Yeah.
different way. And actually, even when you go to the consulates, getting permanent residency, some consulates will require that you're over a certain age to be
Yeah.
considered retired. Other consulates will consider you retired if you have over the required amount. So,
I will say though, like pro tip, I know at least the Guadalajara SAT office has a special line for people over 60 where
Oh,
you
wow.
don't have to be in a virtual queue. You don't have to make a previous appointment. You can just show up. You may have to wait, right? Like there may be other people in
Hmm.
that line, but if you're over the age of 60, there's a special line for you.
Oh, awesome. And that's good to know, especially for people in that area, because and actually the Lake Chapala area is real close to there, so very
Definitely.
important.
There's also a lot of people that are not in Mexico, but they own property in Mexico. They're temporary or permanent residents, or they have a bank account in Mexico, or the CFE company is asking them for their Constancia, or their bank, or somebody's asking them for this paperwork, but they're not in Mexico and they can't process this. So, in that case, we do have a list of recommended RFC facilitators. They're usually accountants where you can issue them a very specific power of attorney specifically only for this, and they can then process this on your behalf.
Awesome. Now, here comes. We're just about to wrap this up, and I think we actually went into this already. Do I have to get an RFSA, or RFC? And what are the consequences? What if I don't get one? And what if I don't make the deadline? And
Yeah.
I like the way Kuru Paul says it. Absolutely nothing is going to happen to you. But
Yeah.
but I think to go in, and that's true. I mean, I'm not making fun of him. I just love the way he says it. Absolutely nothing if you don't make the deadline. But what are the consequences? Do you have to get one? And I think we've already determined that you don't really have to. But what are the consequences of not getting an RFC? And I think that's what's important to stress here. Because if you can get one, it's better off that you have one. And
Hmm.
that's just my thing. I know there's a lot of people that might be a little bit scared because, well, now the government can track me, or now the government's
Yeah.
going to look at my stuff. What are the consequences of not having an RFC? And then the next thing that we're going to go into is what are the long term things that could happen, which are just speculation. I want to make that clear that it's just speculation. But do I need
Yeah.
to get one, and what are the consequences of not getting one if I just don't feel like getting one?
I would say the only times you absolutely should make an effort to get one is if you're planning on owning a home, if you're planning on buying a brand new car from an agency, if you're planning on opening a bank account where they require it. More and more bank companies or institutions are requiring RFCs for new bank holders who open their accounts. If you are, and by the way, for buying a home, it's not that it's required for you to buy a home, but it is required when you're going to set up utilities in your name. And if you don't have the RFC, they'll give you a generic RFC. But then when you go and sell the home, you can't actually make any deductions with those facturas, with whatever you paid from electricity and things like that. So, just FYI, those are the reasons why it would be good down the road.
And you get a
Now,
tax, and you get a tax if you sell a house and you're a
in
resident
your resident,
and you have an RC, you can take advantage of a tax deduction on your capital gains. So you
yeah,
don't have to pay capital gains tax like somebody, maybe that maybe an individual that doesn't have residency, that owns property and sells their house. They're liable for the capital gains tax on that. But
exactly,
if you
which is
have an RC,
30%.
yes. So that's one of the other reasons why is that you get a very
Yeah.
good tax break if you have
Another
an RC.
reason would be if you plan to have a rental property, right? Which, by the way, you need to have work permission to have a rental property in Mexico. That's another big misconception is that anybody could just buy a house and then rent it out in Airbnb. You have to have work permission to do it the right way because you have to pay taxes on that rental income. So if you plan on having a rental property and you plan on charging rent for that rental property, then you need an RFC. So there's a variety of reasons that you're going to need an RFC. There are talks from some of the healthcare brokers that we work with that even to make medical claims now, the medical institution or your insurance company will now require an RFC. It's not implemented yet, but that is something that they're talking about because again, there's not really a way for these doctors, right, to pay or for SAT to know what doctors are billing and things like that.
And
So,
one of the things is that what people also have to understand is that we're getting a large influx of digital nomads that are coming into Mexico. And I know everybody says, well, if you make money in the different country and like you get paid in American dollars and it gets deposited in your American bank account, then I'm technically working in the United States. But one of the things that I'm just seeing down the road is that Mexico is starting to get a little bit more strict on fiscal responsibility. And one thing that I'm not saying this is going to happen, but these are the different things that Mexico's thinking about. For example, if you're physically working in Mexico, technically you're working in Mexico, even if your
mhm,
income source is from another country. And that's technically, saying by the law. I'm not saying that's the way it's working right now.
yeah.
But Mexico is starting to get into a mode of we need to make people more fiscally responsible. You use the renter, for example. I buy a house, I want to rent. Actually, you have to change your Constancia and you actually have to issue facturas for that rent if you
Mhm,
are a renter. For example, also, let's say you hire household help. You have to actually technically pay the benefits to Seguro Social for the person
yeah.
that works in your house full time. So, and then you have to change your constancia to being like if you were an employer. So,
Mhm.
there's a lot of things that I think Mexico is trying to get a hold of right now. What's going to happen? I have no idea. Now, please don't get scared when I say about Mexico taxes worldwide income and you're a digital nomad. And all of a sudden, don't think that Mexico is going to knock on your door and say, "Hey, guess what? We know that you're making money here, or we know that you're working here, blah 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 blah, and we have to pay taxes." Now, need to understand that the United States and Mexico have a tax treaty, so you don't get double taxed. So if you already pay
Mhm.
taxes in the United States, actually, if you pay taxes here, you have to report it to the IRS, but you don't have to pay up to a certain amount. So there's. I'm not trying to cause panic here, but what
Yeah,
I think
confusion.
my point is trying to say is that Mexico's just trying to get a hold of making people more fiscally responsible.
Yeah.
How this is going to affect foreigners that move here, you know, there's been a lot of changes in the Mexican government. Um, I moved here 3 years ago, and I guess we'll wrap this up with this: is that I moved here 3 years ago, and the attitude 3 years ago was, well, this is the way they've always done. I've lived here 15 years, and nothing's changed. Uh,
Mhm.
factureros, what they call them is the people that make the fake facturas. They've been around for 30, 50, 40, 50 years. It's not going to change. Immigration, people have been living here illegally for years. Things were
Yeah.
changing a long time ago. And it's not their fault because they were in a system that hadn't changed for years. And
I
so
agree. It's not a
I think
dinosaur. Now
and
it's
and
changing.
and things are changing, and even when I talk about Facebook groups, which is this is where I'm going to get at the very end about the relocation guide, is that you're going to see a lot of people that come onto these groups and say, this is the way it is. I've been living in Mexico for 10 years or 15 years, and this is the way it is. Not necessarily anymore. This last president that came in has changed a lot of things. Whether you agree with his politics or you don't, he's been a very controversial president here in Mexico, but he's changed a lot of things. And if it's not him, it's been the government that's changed a lot of things. And some of it's
Mhm.
not even from the president. Some of it's just a matter of Mexico coming up to date with technology. Um,
Uh-huh.
it's a lot of Congress has put a lot of money into immigration, not necessarily to start enforcing it as much as to start modernizing it. Uh,
Mhm.
some immigration offices had equipment that was 10, 15 years old. They were still using the old monitors that, you know, and so it's a lot of changes are happening in Mexico. So nobody really knows where this RFC thing's going to go. But one thing that I do suggest is, uh, like I always do at the end of this, uh, at the end of all of these episodes, is I always say, look, this Mexico relocation guide, she's a relocation specialist. She sells a guide. She keeps it up to date. Excuse me. She keeps it up to date with the latest information, and it's well worth purchasing the guide. And like I said, it's also well worth um, looking over all the free resources that she has. And I always tell people, you know what? Um, you also, when you go to these Facebook groups, I always encourage watching as many YouTube videos as possible, going to Facebook groups, asking people what their um, experiences are. But a lot of times, sometimes when you ask a question, you'll get insulted. Some of these Facebook groups can be very, very, very non-forgiving. So one of the things that's great about this relocation guide, they have their own Facebook group um, that you can ask questions with like-minded people that are experiencing the same thing as you. And it's limited to the people that purchase the guide, not 120,000 people.
Right.
Um, so
And if
those
they're
are
not friendly, we kick them out.
so that's one of the things and also like I always tell everybody, the contact lists that she maintains, they're all vetted. So instead of going onto a Facebook group and says who's the best immigration facilitator, you're going to get an honest answer here in Mexico Relocation Guide, because you're going to get a list of all the facilitators in different areas that have been vetted, that have a reputation, that we already know that, not we already know, but that Mexico Relocation Guide already knows that are reliable, real estate contacts, all of those things that you may need in relocating to Mexico. And I really advocate this business because one of the things that I always do with Retired Life in Mexico is I always say integrity of information and quality of information come before profit. And I do stand behind businesses. I do not say that I don't advocate people that are trying to make money and have a business, but my idea of a good business is one that carries on with integrity. And there's very few expat services here in Mexico that I can truly put my name behind. I'm not saying that they're not good at what they do. I'm not putting anybody down, but this is one business that I'm willing to put my name behind, being my reputation and my name behind. And you'll find out that I don't endorse very many people. I don't make any money off of Mexico Relocation Guide. Like I said, I don't have a Patreon. My project is totally nonprofit. Yes, my YouTube channel is monetized, but I guess YouTube just gives me about enough money to buy a dinner once a month with my wife.
Not
So,
much. People always think that people make a lot of money
yeah,
on
a lot of
YouTube.
people think you make a lot of money, and I'm just trying to help people out. I've been in public service all my life, and I continue to do that. And when I'm putting my name behind Mexico Relocation Guide, and like I said, you know, one of the things that we covered in episode number 2 is that Mariana surpassed my subscriber base in YouTube. And, I actually held a celebration or congratulations that she actually surpassed me, because like I said, it's about integrity. It's about being proud of the fact that this person hasn't forgotten where she came from. She's still working hard, and she surpassed me, and she's still sitting here today with me on this show, helping people out and and giving me her time, even though she's surpassed me in subscribers and everything else. And I can't say that of a lot of people in the business, to be honest with you.
And I'm going to continue doing. By the way, the only reason I surpassed his numbers is because he introduced me to all of his audience a while back.
Well, but
So
you
that's
know
the
what?
only reason.
But that's what makes me proud, is that you are that you have been able to get there, and that's what's
Thank
important.
you.
And
Yeah,
like I
we're going to
said,
continue doing these. These are super, super helpful. And I think I wish that, when I was starting to look at a lot of information like this, your channel didn't exist. I wish it existed then, because I would like, oh man, just the amount of information you give away for free it takes away months for people of research.
well, thanks a lot, Mariana. Thank you for, as always, thank you for your time. And I will be leaving chapter markers because I know, like I told you at the very beginning, These videos last about an hour, and you can go straight to the question that you want to go to. Hope this information was useful. See you soon. I look forward to many more episodes. And thanks a lot, Mariana. And see you next time.
Thank you guys for watching. Thank you so much.